All right. Welcome, everyone. If you're logging in, this is Patreon only live stream number 4. And today I'm going to be talking about emotion regulation and the brain, and interoception and some related topics. And of course, this is a Patreon only live stream. So if you're watching this later on and you want to get access to these kinds of live streams, be able to ask questions and uh, leave comments in real time, you can do that by going to patreon.com/sense of mind and signing up there. So I'm going to get right into it. And yeah, so today, like I said, going to be talking about interoception and emotion regulation. And throughout this discussion, I just want to kind of keep have you keep in mind that the science of emotions, especially the neuroscience of emotions, can be a very contentious area. It is a very controversial area of science. There are different camps, different opinions, different views of the data that populate the field. And in my last live stream, my last Patreon live stream, I talked about those different camps, the different theories, a little bit of the history leading up to it. And if you want to learn more about that and get kind of deeper into the nitty gritty of emotions and what these different camps, like basic emotions and theory of constructive emotions, what they have to say and how they differ, I would recommend checking that out. It's called A Very Emotional Debate, and it's on my channel. Um, but today, what I'm going to be talking about is kind of a more general, more about your day to day life and how you can regulate emotions and use a couple of different strategies that I'll talk about to regulate emotions. And I'll be sort of relating this to the brain science, to the neuroscience. Um, but not going to kind of take any stand on the basic emotions versus constructive versus appraisal theories. But that's really neither here nor there, because really what I'm talking about today has to do with this fundamental fact that pretty much all emotion scientists, theorists would agree on, that emotions are the result of particular patterns of activity in your brain. And so when we're talking about emotion regulation, the question is, how do we take control of that activity? And I think it helps to kind of think about what emotions are in your experience and kind of psychologically. And one way to think about them is that they're signals about what you value. They're kind of natural reactions that occur when something important happens to you, or something you think of something important. And they're sort of triggered in that way. They have to do with value, what we value as organisms, as human beings. And the problem that we're talking about when we talk about emotion regulation is pretty much that a particular emotion that we experience can be inappropriate or just simply unhelpful for a particular situation, or for achieving our large or small scale goals. And the truth is that we can learn to shift how we feel so that emotions are aligned with our goals rather than in conflict with them. And so it's just to keep that in mind throughout the rest of this will be really helpful. But next, if emotions are the product of brain activity, like I mentioned, the question is, how do you take control of that brain activity to regulate them? And what we're first going to talk about is interoception. That this is a really helpful, really important tool for achieving that alignment between our emotions and our goals. And interoception, we'll also talk about sort of the other side of perception, which is exteroception. But interoception is the ability to sense and interpret, that is, to perceive internal bodily sensations like heart rate, breathing, digestive processes, feelings in your muscles. Um, and also, some scientists do include skin in that. But I think really important for emotions are those visceral feelings, the feelings in your gut and in your heart, your lungs maybe, and also I would say in your muscles. But a key aspect, it can be a key aspect of emotional regulation because it allows us to become aware of that feeling component of emotion and then to amplify or neutralize, so turn up or turn down that feeling to make the emotion as a whole a more or less powerful driver of our behavior. So like that's going to sort of be the first part of what we talk about today. So I'll get into that as we go. So I'm going to be talking about how this sort of plays out in the brain, and I want you to keep in mind just some basic stuff that I talk about, but don't try to memorize all these brain regions. Don't feel like this is if you don't understand some of the words I say, like insular cortex or thalamus, that means that you won't understand the rest of this. I'm going to try to make this really clear and always bring it back to our kind of everyday experience. And the reason I'm talking about the neuroscience is I think that it provides a really nice anchor for understanding why, potentially why, some of these strategies that I'll talk about today actually work to help you turn down the intensity, especially of negative emotions when they're not helpful or inappropriate in some way. So interoception, and I'll just say before I get into this neuroscience that a lot of this comes from the neuroanatomist Bud Craig and others who have studied interoception and the interoceptive networks and pathways in the brain. And I have a whole video on interoception on my channel where I kind of go deeper into this theory. But for now, I'm just going to really summarize and simplify that interoception is the result of signals traveling from the peripheral nervous system through the spinal cord, up through the brainstem and thalamus, and ultimately arriving in a region of the cortex known as the insula, the insular cortex. And the insula means island. And it's kind of an island of cortical tissue that isn't really visible from the outside of the brain, but it's sort of buried underneath another layer of cortex. But it's neither here nor there because what's really important is that the insula is probably where we become aware, consciously aware of our bodily feelings. And there is some evidence that it's not fully necessary for that awareness. Evidence coming from people with damage to their insula, but there's kind of no doubt that it is really important for our fine-grained perception of our bodily feelings, and that it's also important for kind of integrating those feelings with our cognition and um, our overall experience of an emotion, especially that bodily feeling component of an emotion. So you can have an emotion, or sorry, you can have a feeling, a bodily feeling that is associated with an emotion or not, right? An emotional experience or not, right? So you can have a feeling of kind of an upset stomach or almost like you have some kind of GI issue going on maybe prior to giving a speech or some other kind of public speaking, something that induces anxiety or fear in you can have that same sort of feeling as an upset stomach due to like food poisoning or just, general issues with the GI tract. And what I'm trying to get at there is that the insula is important for both of those kinds of feelings. It doesn't really, in some sense, it doesn't really differentiate between those. But again, this is a really serious simplification of the science of interoception and emotion. So just keep that in mind. Um, Something that I think is super important for this discussion is that the insula is not just a passive receiver of interoceptive signals. It's not that it's just simply um, decoding the signals coming from the peripheral nervous system and then telling us how we feel. It's an active participant in the creation of those feelings. So there are bidirectional connections going to and from the insula and the sort of peripheral nervous system. And the insula and this interoceptive network generally can create a feeling that we attribute to somewhere in our body, even if there's no real physical cause for that sensation. So you might experience stomach pain as a result of psychological stress, even though you don't have like ulcers or actual GI issues, although that kind of psychological stress can feed back and you those those issues. Anyway, the the um the thing I want to get at here is that not only is the insula an active participant in creating those feelings as well as perceiving sort of bottom up sensations, it is also connected to many other brain regions, right? The insula is part of this massive network that is your brain. And that includes those that are involved in like top down control of thoughts and behaviors and emotions, the prefrontal cortex, the associated networks that the PFC is a part of, and also regions that are involved and networks and regions that are involved in subjective value, motivation, and meaning. And those include like the mesolimbic dopamine system, the amygdala, and the thalamus. And I'm just mentioning these so you can kind of get a sense that there's this interconnectedness of the neurobiology of feelings. And that allows us to flexibly adjust our overall experience of feelings, especially when it comes to emotional feelings. And that can have a powerful effect on our our emotional experience. Okay, so how do we use interoception to our advantage? How do we take control of our emotions using interoception? Well, the first step has to do with attention and intention. And so I want to get into that, but first I want to mention that there's a balance here. I don't want to give off the impression like interoception is the key to all sorts of emotion regulation. I'll talk about later when other strategies and the other ways of thinking about this are more useful. But the old saying that goes, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. We don't want to do that with interoception, just turn every emotion regulation problem into a nail. Um, what I like to think about is that it's like a screwdriver. A better analogy for interoception, for emotion regulation, is a screwdriver. So a screwdriver, you can always go in two directions, right? You can turn it clockwise to drive the screw in further, or you can go counterclockwise to let the pressure off or remove the screw entirely, right? So you can see that's a more dynamic tool than a hammer that you can only really pound the nail in. And in this analogy, the screwdriver, right, and the screw are kind of your brain's cognitive control networks, your attention, your focus. But the board is the feelings of your body. So when you drill into the board, you're focusing more intensely on signals from the body, sensations from your muscles, your visceral organs, your skin, your heart rate, your breathing. When you turn it in the opposite direction, you begin to remove that screw. You shift your attention to the outside world, sights, sounds, smells, etc. So drilling in is more interoception, drilling out is more exteroception. Exteroception referring to perception of things outside of your body, outside in the outside world. We'll talk more about exteroception later on, but you might be wondering, okay, what is this analogy? What does this really have to do with emotions? How do we use this screwdriver analogy to our advantage? And the thing is that when we experience powerful negative emotions and we want to free ourselves from their grip, when we know that they're not helpful to us, often what we need to do is drill down into those feelings that come with the negative emotion. So I'm not saying ruminating on the thoughts surrounding the feeling, because all that's going to do is kind of restart that emotion process in your brain. But if you focus directly on those physical feelings themselves and you have an intention of letting go of them, of letting them dissipate, right? Again, these are not caused by any real physical sensation. You can allow them to dissipate. And it's an interesting sort of counterintuitive thing. Um, but by doing this, you can acknowledge the emotion, but also make it less powerful. So that might sound counterintuitive, right? Wouldn't focusing on something painful or uncomfortable make it more painful and uncomfortable? And yes, that is true. I don't want to sort of I don't want this to sound like just focusing on pain is going to make the pain go away, because there is research that shows that people, when you focus on how painful something is, you can actually turn up that intensity and that uncomfortability. But when we're talking especially about emotional feelings, attending to the fine grained details of those bodily sensations, right? The heart rate, the changes in your chest, that pressure, that tenseness, tightness, whatever. Um, you can shift your attention from that discomfort and the urge to get rid of it, that like, just alarm bells, and toward just what is that? The waves of pressure, the heaviness, the tingling, um, the sensations of breathing in your body. And combining that with the intention of actively turning it down or simply letting it dissipate can be very powerful for giving you some distance from the physical component of those emotions, the bodily component. And the way that I think about this is that you are regulating your mind via its connection to your body. So it's like you're using these sort of cognitive control and attention networks to change the activity of these interoceptive networks. And the basic idea is that you're shifting bodily feelings, you're shifting what your brain is perceiving is going on in your body, which can then have this bottom up effect on your emotional experience. So, by exerting a top down influence on interoception, you set off a natural process where your brain then interprets the now neutral bodily sensations as a more neutral mental state or neutral emotional state. And so I just want to kind of pause there and talk about what would be a sort of everyday life situation where this would be useful. And I thought of this because I was watching this series on Netflix called Beef, and it starts out with this road rage scene, this crazy road rage scene where the two main characters are just feeding off of each other, chasing each other down the roads, and just feeding off each other's anger because they got into this road rage incident, and it just escalates and escalates. And I think it's funny to us because we all see how counterproductive having that emotion, that feeling, driving our behavior in that moment is. I think we've all had, or many of us at least have had that moment in traffic where you just want to punch the person who's driving in front of you, for they cut you off or something. It just gives you that feeling, and that feeling may be helpful for avoiding an accident, but when it goes on and you're still angry for so long, often I think what's going on is that anger, that tense, that tightness in your chest, that just uncomfortable sensation is just, oh, you got to get rid of it somehow. You got to do something with that energy. But if you can mindfully pay attention to what those sensations are with that intention of letting them go, because this isn't aligned with your goals and your values, you can really let that emotion dissipate much quicker. But there are times when turning the screwdriver in the other direction, right? Not using interoception, but exteroception can be really helpful. And so here, what I want to emphasize is that it is possible to become so focused on feelings, on interoceptive sensations, that you are kind of overcome with pain or discomfort at the slightest hint of stress because you're just so in tune with those bodily sensations. And I have to say, I think this has actually happened to me in the past, that I got so excited about using interoception in this way of regulating emotions that I got like overzealous with it. It became that, that hammer. I was just, every single emotional regulation problem, I was just using the hammer of interoception to try to dissipate those feelings. And I think what that can do is sort of, um, Andrew Huberman of the Huberman Lab podcast at Stanford neuroscientist, he talks about this as you've kind of overtrained that interoceptive system. And so I think it is important to be able to flexibly go between interoception and exteroception, right? And so how do we use this other direction of the screwdriver? And sometimes when those emotions are just too powerful, and it's just it's just so difficult to get down deep into what it really feels like, what those fine grain interoceptive sensations are, to just let them go when they just seem to keep coming. Sometimes what can be really helpful is to remove your attention from your body, right, and place it on the outside world, on visual or auditory stimuli or even smells. But focusing outward, right, can help you to quiet the activity in these interoceptive networks, and these, maybe even these pain related regions like the amygdala and the periaqueductal gray. And again, I am simplifying the neuroscience, and just sort of trying to give you a basic picture, something to anchor this discussion to. But focusing outward will shift those neural resources to those kind of exteroceptive regions like visual and auditory cortices. And so when you practice that shift, you can notice that there may be this sense of relief because you're just not experiencing that feeling, that painful feeling, that emotional, negative emotion so intensely, because you've just simply removed yourself from it. Now, the reality is that this is related to a method of emotion regulation known as distraction, right? And I want to talk about distraction because what it is when you're experiencing a negative emotion and then you deliberately focus your attention on something other than the emotion, right? So I'm just saying, look out at the sunset, look out around you, hear the sounds around you. Um, Now, this could be a useful first step, right? But the thing is that distraction doesn't remove the causes of the emotion. So you will eventually have to face it. And that's a really important point. But if you use distraction in combination with kind of an accepting attitude toward the emotion or a constructive attitude toward it, it can be incredibly useful. And I just want to emphasize that point with a quote from a 2017 article by the psychologist Martin Volgast and Lars Gunnar Lund. Um, they say that, quote, distraction would be adaptive if it is only a matter of temporarily redirecting one's attention towards something else for a short period of time with the intention of getting back into contact with that emotion or the challenging situation in the near future. So that's basically what I was just saying. You have to face it eventually. So stepping back, right? Cognitively, perceptually stepping back can allow you to make that plan of dealing with the source or the emotion itself. So shifting your attention, right, to the external, but then again from the external environment to whatever you can do in this moment to move forward through this experience is also extremely helpful, because often I think what's happening is we can feel a loss of control. Um, but whatever it is, reframing your situation changing it, recontextualizing, maybe from one where you're powerless to one where you can control some aspect of what's going on, however insignificant that may at first seem, can be really helpful. You can also reframe negative events as learning opportunities, as like a win in the midst of what seems like a total loss. Thinking about, what did I learn from this experience, and really seeing the positive in it. But also, there may just be, like going back to the everyday example of being in traffic and having like a bit of road rage. Um, when that happens, one way to deal with that is to say, okay, why'd that person cut me off? Is it because they're just a terrible person? They're just a jerk? Like they just want to be an aggressive, dangerous driver? Or is this person trying to get to the hospital? Is there some emergency going on? And this person is just, they're not even thinking about you. They're just trying to get to this place. And when you do that, it can really help you to recontextualize, reframe, and understand that it might not even be the case. They might be a jerk, but again, when you do that, this is for you to let go of those unhelpful or unnecessary negative emotions. And so using exteroception or some other form of distraction and then coming back and reframing the situation can be really powerful. And sorry. So when you step back from those painful or uncomfortable feelings, you accept the situation, acknowledge the validity of your emotions about it, and then commit to taking whatever actions you can, whether that be learning from a experience of loss or um, changing your understanding of the situation. You'll notice that your emotions begin to change. And sometimes this is a lot harder than others, depending on what's going on. But there is, I think, always a window where we can change our experience of it. And I believe, I don't want to misquote, I don't want to misattribute this quote. I think it's from Viktor Frankl, and it is that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space we have the capacity to choose. It's something like that. And I think that, whether you're using interoception or exteroception, what you're trying to do is create that space between your stimulus and your response, and allow you to recontextualize, to change your understanding and your model of what's going on in the world. And so in this case, when we're talking about exteroception, right? Instead of fostering that bottom up change from bodily feelings to emotional experience, it's kind of more like a top down change that starts with your understanding of the situation and yourself, and then feeds that into your brain's natural emotional reaction to that situation. So it's not like changing the feeling component, but it's more like the cognitive component. And I'll just conclude by saying that, sort of summarizing all this, but emotions are, as we said, intricately tied, dependent upon brain activity. And we can regulate them to align with our goals. And I did not, by any means, cover the whole gamut of different emotional regulation strategies. I was trying to give a kind of concise explanation of some of the broader categories of these strategies. And one of those is using interoceptions, the ability to sense internal bodily sensations, to perceive what's going on in your body. And remembering that this is not just a bottom-up process of noticing sensations coming from the body, it's also this top-down process of being able to kind of change what the brain is perceiving is going on in the body. And by focusing attention on sensations, on those feelings that come with emotions, we can modify the intensity of the emotion. And the insula is, of course, vital in this, but this whole interoceptive network, and really, in some ways, the whole brain is really important for this. But we can also shift our attention outward for relief. We can do that exteroceptive processing. So by reframing, so by looking out, by using kind of distraction and then giving us that space to reframe the situation, we can take small steps and embrace challenges as opportunities and change our understanding of our framing really of what's happening. We can foster personal growth, but also just a more positive emotional experience or less negative. And finally, emotion regulation empowers us to navigate these challenges and create a more fulfilling life, because I think emotions really are the substance of our lives. They really constitute a lot of what we think of as kind of the meaning and the importance of of what goes on in our lives. And so when we can learn to start to master or influence these emotional processes, it can be extremely powerful for our overall well-being, our mental health, our happiness. And I think that's just important for all of us to continue to try to get better and better at this life skill, really. So that is pretty much it for my discussion of this interoception and exteroception, neuroscience, emotion regulation. And let me know if you have any comments, throw them in the comment section. I really appreciate you guys watching these videos and engaging. Give this a like and subscribe to this channel. And like I said, if you want to get access to these live streams where you can ask questions and comment in real time, go to patreon.com/sense of mind, and you can sign up there. What you'll also get are written sort of essay versions of every new video, including this one. So definitely check that out if you're interested. That really helps me keep the lights on with all this stuff. I really depend on you guys, on the viewers. So thank you so much for being here, for checking this out. As always, if you have any questions or anything, throw them in the comments. If you think that I got something wrong or I was off on some point, I really always appreciate that. I like to correct mistakes when I can. So again, thank you. I will catch you next time.